Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast with Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about gratitude and mindfulness. I thought about this, of course, as we lead into the holiday season. And I have so many clients who share with me that there's a pressure that comes with the holidays. You've heard this, but so many people in their therapy are sharing with me that there's a pressure that comes with the holidays, an expectation that everything is supposed to be perfect and ideal and wonderful. And so I thought that it was time to revisit this idea of gratitude, of practicing gratitude and mindfulness. Before I get into that, my announcements for this evening, for this week, we are full up in November and December for the Finding You intensives. The next available ones are January 15th through 19th. It is our in-person. That's going to be run by Emma Reedy. June, if you know Emma, if you've heard of Emma, you've heard of wonderful things. Many people would say she does a better job than I do. She's going to be hosting that with her husband, Jordan, June. And January 24th through 26th is our online Finding You. We're finding, more so than with our old program, that these are filling up far in advance. So January is already filling up and probably will be filled in the next couple of weeks. If that continues to happen, we'll add a second Finding You per month. But we're really excited about that. In addition to the upcoming intensives, I also have the Conscious Parenting Workshop that I will be hosting on January 10th, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Mountain Time. That is an all-day workshop talking about attachment-based parenting, talking about what it means to parent at a more conscious level. We'll have 1 hour for break. There'll be discussions, and you can email us for all questions. If you want to sign up, email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. And then for professionals, or for those that are more advanced, who want to hear a more clinical version of attachment-based therapy, I'm going to be teaching a masterclass on March 7th, 9 a.m. again to 4 p.m. Mountain Time. I really look forward to both of those. I love those days. They go so fast for me. So with that, let's get into tonight's broadcast. Here's something I wrote personally. I don't like the suggestion of, personally, I don't like the suggestion of practicing gratitude. Perhaps it is because it reminds me of the messages from my past when I was in pain that I should be grateful for what I do have. But practicing mindfulness, on the other hand, feeling whatever I'm feeling leads me to gratitude. I have learned to honor what is, which includes the many wonderful things about my life. So that's really the thesis of tonight's podcast. I'm going to be talking about how mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, in a way, is the exact opposite of practicing gratitude. Some people might argue with me about that, but in the sense that I'm thinking about it and talking about it this evening, it is the opposite of practicing gratitude. But the paradox is that, in my experience, it leads to the same end. It leads to gratitude. And what it doesn't sacrifice, or what it doesn't come with in terms of side effects, is that ignoring that spiritual bypass of our pain, of our sadness, and the lessons and the value and the love and the care that's embedded in those painful and difficult feelings. And then at the end, I'll be talking a little bit more about the idea of practicing gratitude from some folks that I really respect the way that they talk about it. Abundance does not necessarily lead to gratitude. My experience has shown me that, on the contrary, those with a lot are often without gratitude, while those with very little are often more inclined towards gratitude. It has always been so interesting to watch students and clients in our therapeutic wilderness program develop a stronger feeling of gratitude. In many ways, the wilderness setting was an experience in mindfulness. It's a place to learn how to feel, to notice more with all the distractions removed. We learn to appreciate what we have because we cannot take anything for granted. So the first idea is to get rid of this idea that there's a direct connection between what we have, what's happening to our life, and the experience of gratitude. Right? I think, and sometimes the most desperate, the most despair that people find in their lives is when they imagine that this thing that they've been striving for, this thing that they have been told would give them happiness and gratitude, is finally achieved, finally accomplished, finally acquired, and they find that it doesn't bring the expected gratitude, the expected sense of happiness and joy that they thought about it. Like somebody once said about something like this, they have leaned the ladder up against the wrong wall when they get to the top, they realize it wasn't all that it was supposed to be. I love this idea from Alan Watts. I'm going to borrow from this Alan Watts quote and talk about it and how I'm going to be speaking about gratitude and mindfulness this evening. He said, problems that remain persistently insoluble should always be suspected as questions asked in the wrong way. So much of what I am describing, so much of what I'm going to be talking about tonight is really a shift in thinking. When I do psychotherapy, when I teach psychotherapy, when I do these podcasts, I'm really inviting a complete reconsideration of the relationship that we have with life, with ourselves, and with others. It's far beyond a simple behavior change or what psychologists will call a first order change. It is something much more fundamental than that. So if we find ourselves, you know that old phrase that I'm sure everybody listening has heard, attributed to Einstein, that says insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. That's another way of saying what Alan Watts is saying here. We have to change our thinking about things. We have to change the way that we're relating to the world around us and to unlearn the things that we were taught from childhood. Adam Grant, the great organizational psychologist, says, in hard times, people don't want to be told to look on the bright side. They want to know that you're on their side. Even if you can't help them feel better, you can always help them feel seen. The best way to support others is not to cheer them up, it is to show up. And I think maybe the first idea that I, as a aspiring therapist, had, and I think a lot of people have, as they get introduced to the idea of helping others, of supporting others, of coaching others, of doing therapy for others, is this idea that we can make them happy. I talk about this in the beginning of the journey of the heroic parent because that's when it was happening to me. I had this experience, of course, that I was here, or this belief, that this history, that I was here, that I was coming into the profession to make people happy. But then I realized in pretty short order that my job was to help people feel everything. And that sense of joy, that sense of underlying serenity and peace comes when we embrace all the feelings. My therapist loves to tell this story about where the LDS missionaries, we live in Utah, of course, and so the Mormon missionaries were knocking on the door of her brother. And her brother, also a psychologist, opened the door. And the missionaries, in their pitch, said to this psychologist, do you want to learn how to be happy? And this psychologist said, in a witty sense, he responded back, he said, I want to learn to feel all of my feelings. This idea that we can focus on and just feel a feeling, to me, has in it the core ingredients of gaslighting, the core ingredients of discounting, dismissing, and avoiding what we feel. If we avoid the sadness, if we avoid the hurt, we're going to miss the commensurate joy. I read a quote just yesterday on somebody's social media that says, I get most worried when people aren't listening to sad songs and reading sad stories. I think I shared the quote last week where a reporter, I believe an anthropologist, was interviewing somebody in some primitive culture and said to the person, to the woman, you have so much joy. And then one woman responded by saying, that's because I cry so much. I used to say to students who were experiencing depression, the way through depression, the way to unblock it, the way to unfreeze it or thaw it out is you have to go through the sadness. You have to go through the grief. You have to go through the feelings that come when you're letting go. If you dam up a river, you dam up all of it. You can't just pull back or hold back the feelings of sadness and grief, of hurt and pain, and expect to feel, again, an equal measure of joy. So instead of practicing gratitude, you can try practicing mindfulness. I find that feeling all of our feelings and being present with what is inevitably leads to gratitude. Because when you think about it, but just in a simple way, somebody wrote a comment about how hard it is to think about gratitude when your child is suffering. Perfect example of what I'm teaching this evening. That if you focus on everything that's going on in your body, if you take a few moments to meditate, if you take a few moments just to sit and practice mindfulness, You'll become aware of the things that you're not focusing on. I'm going to use this analogy several times this evening that the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh talked about. He said the first thing that we sense or feel when we have a toothache is how much we've taken for granted up to that point, the non-toothache. Think about that. Think about if you don't have a toothache now, and I hope you don't, run your tongue across all of your teeth and take a moment to realize that what comes with it, that you don't have a toothache. What feelings come up for you. I didn't tell you to feel gratitude, just to be aware of the fact that you have a mouthful of teeth, none of which hurt in that way, that acute, extreme way that a toothache can hurt. That's the key to gratitude, embracing it all, which means you're going to feel your pain. You're going to feel your sadness. You're going to feel your hurt. You're going to feel all the feelings, the entire rainbow. In a way, I'm talking about the idea of spiritual bypassing. If you don't know what that is, it's avoiding the developmental tasks by always putting things in a positive context. Thus, you remove the necessary pain, grief, and anxiety that is inherent in our lives. It is whitewashing. It is a Pollyannish approach. I have such a visceral reaction when somebody tells me how to feel. I think I shared a couple of months ago, my wife and I were going to a doctor's appointment. And we were just talking to each other in front of the receptionist. And my wife shared that she felt some unpleasant feeling about something. And without being asked, the receptionist interjected into our conversation and said, "Oh, don't feel that way." And my wife just looked at me and with that look in her eye, that knowing look in her eye. And I thought about it. In fact, I shared a quote shortly after that. I wrote something that says, giving advice, especially when that advice is not asked for, is most often a sign of lower self-awareness. We encourage our children, we encourage each other, our spouses, to feel everything. And if we don't have the capacity in general, in a broad sense, or in a limited sense, in that moment, we're tired, we're overstressed, we're overworked, then we tell our partner, we tell our other that we don't have it. And we ask or invite them to find somewhere where they can be held, somewhere they can be understood. That's what I love about my psychotherapy that I participate in each week. It's the one place that I can't get it wrong. It's the one place that I get to feel what I feel. And I remember early on, I spent many years in psychotherapy trying to be a good client. Somebody said something like this to me this week. I came into therapy with my therapist hat on. I was afraid to express resentment or jealousy or frustration or anger in the most extreme sense. I had been taught as a child, I'd been taught by my parents, by the culture, that those were bad and wrong feelings. I'd even learned in sort of a different kind of way through my study in psychology with professors that those were the problems, that they had to be something that was fixed or erased. So I had to learn in therapy just to show up, to say the messy thing, to say the unwise, the unenlightened thing. And when I started to do that more and more, the therapy became much, much richer for me. Spiritual bypassing is a lot like toxic positivity, overvaluing happy and positive feelings at the expense of all feelings. It's always interesting to me when I think about, I was visiting a very large mental health program, huge mental health program, with a really cool office, and they had slogans and ideas on the wall. It was really wonderful. And they had their core values clearly painted onto the walls of the great room that you walked into when you walked into their offices. And they talked about how the goal was to give people joy, to help people feel joy. And I always have a problem when I think about psychotherapy or the therapeutic process ending in the feeling of joy or happiness. That is definitely a part of it. It's definitely a part of it. That's definitely part of what we get access to as we heal, as we grow, as we evolve. But we also feel more pain. We feel more sadness. We feel more of all of the less pleasant feelings. And really, mental health and whatever what that goal is comes in large part with a person's ability to tolerate and feel all of those unpleasant feelings. All of our masking, all of our symptoms, our distractions, our medications, our ways not to feel the unwanted feelings, the unasked for feelings. Gaslighting, which has become such a popular term lately. By the way, I love to just encourage this. If you haven't seen the movie Gaslight, it was done in I want to say, late 1930s. I might be wrong by a couple of years. Ingrid Bergman was in it. I can't remember who else was in it. And it's about the story of a woman who marries this man who's a killer. And he turns the gas lights off just a little bit every day and gets everybody around his wife to lie to her about it. That's where the term gaslighting comes from, is this systemic, this destructive dismissing of somebody's lived experience. Gaslighting is dismissing, minimizing, discounting another's experience to protect one's ego. Usually it comes from the need to be good. If you're mad at me, I will find a way. And as a therapist, I'm absolutely an expert in this. I spent many years as a therapist doing this to people very often without even knowing it, long after I was teaching about listening and holding feelings. But of course, I had assumed I was good. So if you had upset feelings about me, it was simply something that you misunderstood. Right? There was some twisted thinking in play here for you to think something so negatively about me, so negative about me. I think some people think of gaslighting in terms of a really overt, grandiose, malignant narcissist. And while that might be one aspect of it, I think it could be much more subtle than that. Gaslighting is the opposite of holding space. And again, human beings thrive when they are seen. Ideally, we would have received that in childhood. Ideally, we would have given it to our children in a large abundance during their childhood. But because of our own limitations, our own difficulties, our own struggles with our own esteem and sense of worth, ideas, the whole idea, of course, that the goal of life was to be a good person. If we have to hold that banner, carry that banner, aspire to that idea, then of course everybody's negative feelings about us, hurt from us, anger at us, would have to be dealt with in this way. It threatened the entire idea of what we were taught our existence was, our goals ought to be. So I think it can be much more subtle and is much more pervasive than just in those rare cases of that overt, malignant narcissist. Mindfulness is being present in the moment. Can you enjoy the non-toothache along with everything else that is going on in your life? Mindfulness is a part of dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a kind of therapy that is shown to be very effective, according to the research, at dealing with people who have borderline personality disorder, a very extreme way of coping with stress and emotional dysregulation. And so part of the antidote for that high level of dysregulation and discomfort and symptomology is to be mindful, to sit with what is, all of it. It's only when we have lost our sight that we recognize that having eyes is a wonderful thing. So, it's that old song. You never know what you got till it's gone. That is a very common idea. We learn so much by what we lose, by what is missing. And that can bring us, if we lean into it, if we keep our hearts open and don't become bitter and hateful, again, as a way to protect ourselves. It can open us up to all the joyful feelings. And even in a deeper sense, we can begin to see the connection between our pain and our joy, our love and our loss. The cost of great love is grief. The cost of pain is caring, is wanting. We can practice mindfulness in any activity. It doesn't have to be sitting on the ground in the lotus position. We can practice mindfulness doing the dishes, changing a diaper, walking, eating. Recently, in the last couple of years, I have found it to be very effective when cooking dinner for my family, which is not something that I had as a child with a single mother who worked more than full time. So I didn't have a model for it. And sometimes at the end of the day, I just want to plop down on the couch. I want to turn my brain off because it's been revving at such high RPMs all day and lose myself in a game on TV or a series or a movie. And that can be really helpful for me. But I've also begun to enjoy cooking, even when I'm tired, thinking I've been sitting in this chair that you see me in now. I've been sitting in this chair all day. I've been talking to various clients in various capacities. And I get to stand up. I get to move my body. Even when I make a lot of dishes, it's an opportunity to serve my child, my wife, to serve my family. I find great joy in that. That's a core value of mine. And I get to move my body, move around. And the way that our kitchen is designed, like many people with an open floor plan is, my family's close by. I can talk to them at the same time. And as I become mindful, I'm not trying to be happy. I'm not trying to feel something different. I'm just focusing on what's happening. Even when your child is in struggles, and you can begin to embrace what that is, how that's expanding you, how you're growing. Notice I'm not saying you can be happy and grateful for it. Absolutely not. You can notice that it comes with rewards, and the pain that you feel, the hurt that you feel, all of those lists of uncomfortable, unpleasant, unwanted feelings, at the bare minimum, are evidence that you're still alive and breathing. And in my deepest depths, in my darkest moments, that's a mindful idea that I hold on to, that I'm still feeling, which means that I'm still alive. Psychotherapy can be seen as a talking meditation. I love to think of it that way. I cannot tell you how many times I have been told by my therapist and how many times I tell my clients, I'm glad you're talking about it. And what I'm trying to encourage is the self-reflective process. And just my holding that space, welcoming that, fosters and encourages greater clarity and self-awareness. It exposes in the client the sense that they think that they are too much because they expect me to get bored or to get impatient. They have the family around them, maybe their parents, telling them, you keep talking about this. I said it twice today to 2 different clients. I'm not bored of this. This is okay. You can keep talking about this. I don't have a limit on how much I can listen to this. Well, I probably do, but it's so far out there, it's not worth speaking about. Psychotherapy asks the questions. How do you feel? That's the old cliche. That is a mindfulness question. Why did you do that? What do you want? I found with many people, even the young people that I've worked with over the years, that's one of the most difficult questions to ask. If you've seen the movie Good Will Hunting, which is, as a therapist, it's probably on most of our lists for our favorite movies with Matt Damon. I'm assuming most everybody has seen it. But there's a moment when the therapy with Will really took a turn. And it was when the character Sean, played by Robin Williams, said to Will, played by Matt Damon, what do you want? What do you want? And I think that question, or the answer to that question, is the starting point of the self-reflective process. I remember when my children were struggling, my therapist said, when I was trying to decide various big decisions, and she said, what do you want at the deepest level? What do you want with your son? And I said, I just want to be available to him as a resource, as a support. And all she said to me was, that's a really great thing to focus on when you're considering the decisions that you're considering. And that became my North Star. How can I support my child in helping them get where they need to go? And I will break and bleed and struggle and cry, pound my fists on the table. I'll do all of those things on that journey. But I stay centered by that deep question, that invitation to mindfulness. Why did you react that way? Who are you? Who are you becomes, in the Finding You program, the large question, right? The overarching question. All questions, in a way, can be traced back to that. Who are you? What's your relationship to others, to the problems? And when you begin to answer those questions, then the other questions that you have become more clear. I learned in my intensive, my very first intensive, as a participant, I learned that I was asking the wrong question. It wasn't what should I do that had a couple of problems with it. It was, who am I? And can I speak that truth to the people around me? Can I deal with the subsequent fear of being left or rejected or judged? Because I am hypersensitive in tune to prevent all of that from happening because of my background. Another principle in mindfulness, also a very core feature of dialectical behavioral therapy, is the idea of radical acceptance, borrowed from Buddhism. Very similar to faith in other religions. And everybody, it's like surrender. It's like letting go. Radical acceptance, in similar ways, people hear that and they hear passivity. They hear do nothing. That's not radical acceptance. People who let go, people who surrender, people who practice radical acceptance are assertive and dynamic, and they're doers in the world in so many ways. I would argue they make the biggest difference in the world. I think I've shared that I moved from Southern California. Growing up, I didn't have a winter coat. I had one now and again because we would go to Utah or to the mountains to ski. We'd go to various places where you needed a winter parka, a coat. And I would take it for that trip. But by the time that we needed it again, I'd grown out of it. So winter coats were I didn't have a lot of them growing up. I wore board shorts and T-shirts and flip-flops many days to school. Grew up a surfer in Southern California, Orange County. So when I moved to Utah and I came into November like it is now, I just had an anger and a rage, the opposite of radical acceptance, for the winter. I was mad at the weather. I was mad at the planet. I was mad at the seasons. I shared just in a recent broadcast, I would often spend 5 minutes. I would tell my therapist, I'm going to spend 5 minutes absolutely bitching about the weather. And she would, of course, always welcome it. And she would empathize with me. And then a few years ago, it just switched. It's just different. I think it was after a particularly hot summer. I always loved the summer. After one particular hot summer, I thought, summer's not everything. It's something, and I do love it still, but it's not everything. Winter has a different thing to offer us. Fall, spring have different things to offer us. And now today, 2024, as it's snowing outside today in Utah, I was pulling out of the driveway this morning to drive my daughter to school, and it was snowing, and I thought, this is winter. This is the time. The days are shorter. It's time for hot chocolate and the fireplace. It's time to be cozy under a blanket. It's time to be quieter and more still. I have finally learned at 56 years old to accept the seasons on the planet that we live. Radical acceptance, in a way, is an antidote, or at least partly a contributor in a way, to an antidote to addictions, to compulsive self-medicating. This idea comes to me tonight when I talk about mindfulness, this idea that the only way out of the situation is through it. So many people want to hack a workaround, a secret set of steps. And as I've been saying in the last couple of weeks, the tool, the technique, I've always said, or said for many years, I don't emphasize technique and tools, but I think I misspoke all those years. I do teach about one very important, one very integral tool, and that is psychotherapy with a therapist that can see you. Psychotherapy is a place that we go to get support, to go through what we have to go through. Again, to keep our heart open, to not close it, to not turn the world into good and bad, us and them, to not vilify those who have hurt us, but to feel the pain. And then to set the subsequent boundaries that we need to appropriately protect ourselves from further abuse. The idea of impermanence, also from Buddhism. The idea that no feeling is final. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about lean into your sadness, lean into your pain with great earnestness. And remember that it is temporary. It's a hard one. I think about that very often with difficult days. I will not feel this way all the time. We learn that our sadness, our distress, and our anger don't define us, that these too shall pass. And of course, the idea of non-duality. The idea that our grief and our love are inextricably connected. That if we get rid of our grief, we get rid of our love. Thich Nhat Hanh says, so you can see the flower in the rubbish and the rubbish in the flower. And psychotherapy is the same way. The flower is not afraid of the garbage, and the garbage does not think the flower is its enemy. Hatred and despair are like the garbage in us. We don't throw them out and get rid of them, because that's what makes the flower grow. We could be mindful of our anger. We can recognize it in us. It is energy. If you are angry about being angry, your anger is doubled and you'll suffer more. I think so much of us think of, I'll use the word anger because he did as an example. We think of it as a problem to be got rid of instead of something to listen to and to sit with, to learn about it, to unpack it, to embrace it. Rumi said, the cure for the pain is in the pain. Right? The thing that stands in the way is the way. I believe that was Marcus Aurelius. The idea is that we go through it and we become richer and larger and more capable of feeling all of it. In his book, You Are Here, which I highly recommend to any of you who are interested in these ideas tonight, Thich Nhat Hanh says, do not fight against pain. Do not fight against irritation or jealousy. Embrace them with great tenderness, as though you were embracing a little baby. Your anger is yourself, and you should not be violent toward it. The same thing goes for all of your emotions. If you feel irritation or depression or despair, recognize their presence and practice this mantra. Dear one, I am here for you. You talk to your depression or your anger just as you would to a child. You embrace it tenderly with the energy of mindfulness and say, dear one, I know you are there, and I am going to take care of you, just as you would with a crying baby. There is no discrimination or dualism here, because compassion and love are you, but anger is too. All three are organic in nature, so you don't need to be afraid. You can transform them. The poet Rilke said, let everything happen to you. Beauty and terror, just keep going, no feeling is final. I love that part of his writing. Again, in psychotherapy, the two ideas that I try to communicate without always saying them explicitly, although I do in settings like this where I'm teaching, is to say to clients, just keep going. Just keep going. But remember, you don't have to go along. I will go with you. We can do it together. And when we are in situations, circumstances where the pain is inevitable, the pain is unavoidable, when we lose somebody, when somebody we care about, like our children or our spouses, our family is struggling, to remove the pain and the sadness wouldn't make sense, although you don't have to feel it all the time. If you need a break, you can do that too. But if we, again, chronically try to avoid it, that's where we get into mental illness and addiction. So we learn to feel. We learn to feel all of the things. And with that, our hearts become more grateful, more open, richer, more capable. I love what Thich Nhat Hanh says. He says, if your love is, this is about mindfulness in relationships. He says, if your love is making the other person happy, it might not be love. And the direct quote is, to love somebody without knowing how wounds the person that we love. And in another sense, you can't love somebody if you don't understand them. Because if you don't understand them, if you don't know them, you're not really loving them. So our measure of love is only related to how well we can understand and see somebody. And you think about that conversely, if we are frustrated and not loving somebody, we've lost connection to them. So we develop greater and greater capacities. That's why our children are our most important teachers. My youngest daughter was telling my wife and I the other night, talking about getting driven to school by either one of us. She was asking for me to drive her to school and for her mother to pick her up. That didn't make my wife feel too good. I didn't necessarily need it. And she noticed a kind of tenderness in us, and she said to my wife, she said, it's just that you ask too many questions. You talk too much in the morning. We said, okay. And then she said, but Dad doesn't talk enough, and that hurts my feelings. So you make me mad in the morning. He makes me sad in the morning, is what she said. And she walked away. That was not a big event. And I thought, what a perfect illustration. You can't win. You cannot win. Raising children is an unwinnable equation. In our efforts to support our children, we will make big mistakes, small mistakes. We will have great successes. We will grow and enlarge in many ways. But when we think of what the Western world tries to teach religiously and philosophically, this bifurcation of good and bad, this splitting of the world into two piles, and then we get told that the good stuff is the important stuff, we end up with diseases and mental illness and addictions. When we are able or develop the capacity to hold all of it, we end up more full of joy, more often, a more meaningful life, a richer life, greater connections, deeper love, greater happiness. The practice of the therapist should be directed toward themselves first. Same with parents, spouses, friends, etc. The first thing is for me to become mindful. For me to sit, when I'm sitting with a client, I'm constantly, because of my training, asking myself, what's the reaction you're having in your body? Are you feeling scared, anxious? Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling hopeful? Are you feeling agitated? And that starts to get me to understand what's going on. It's part of my practice. It's part of what I offer to the client, is my own mindfulness, and same with my children. If I look for a therapist, Thich Nhat Hanh says, I look for a therapist who is happy in their own life. Right? That's the idea that it's the idea that they have in AA, which is it's a program of attraction, not promotion. You want to teach your children? Show them the joy that you have. Show them the resilience you have. Show them the strength that you have. Show them the capacity that you have. I've told the story in years past about the young girl at the end of her stay with us in our residential program. She was talking to her parents, and they were anxious about the summer reading for her high achieving private school that she was going back to. And the parents were beyond themselves anxious. Specifically, the mother was saying, you haven't read anything. You haven't read all of your assignments this week. You're not preparing yourself. I'm so worried about you. And the daughter just said to her, in therapy with me, said to her mother, what do you know about happiness? Tell me what you know about happiness. Show me. I think about that with our Finding You intensives. You leave a Finding You, it's more than just saying, oh, you should go or you should go. That's a really good business model for us, and it helps. But really what it is show them what it's done for you. Show them how you've grown. Show them how you're happier. Show them how your happiness is less dependent upon them. Show them how your serenity and peace is now your project. And they'll get curious. And then when and if you do make the suggestion or the invitation that they attend, they'll be much, much more likely to accept that invitation. Now I want to talk a little bit about the practice of gratitude for those of you who that really resonates with, because I think there are a lot of people that think about practicing gratitude instead of mindfulness. Like I said, first of all, it requires us to feel all of our feelings. The first thing I know about encouraging gratitude in others is don't tell them to feel grateful, encourage them to feel everything. Gratitude, for it to be deep and consistent in our lives, comes from a sense of wholeness. When we learn to feel everything, we are more likely to recognize feelings of gratitude. As we more fully hold our pain, sadness, and hurt, we will also come to see their connection to the love and the joy that we feel. That is, our pain and hurt are evidence of our capacity for connection and love. Holding our pain and hurt with gentleness and awareness, we'll begin to connect it to the things in our life that we most value. Instead, we often try to block out or escape the pain. And in doing, we limit our capacity to feel. We practice mindfulness to recognize the non-toothache. At the same time, we recognize the sadness, the grief, the hurt, the fear, because we opened up that receptacle that is our observing mind, that we've honed that skill, that we've developed that muscle. The feeling of gratitude for the non-toothache will more likely come through. Mindfulness is the opposite of practicing the practice of self-medicating and escapism. Mindfulness is a practice or effort to focus on what is. Mindfulness can increase our sense of gratitude. Thich Nhat Hanh teaches that the first thing we notice when we wake up with a toothache is that the previous non-toothache that we've had has been something we took for granted. Mindfulness means that we will recognize our non-toothache before it's gone. This will engender gratitude for our non-toothache. I think during some of my difficult times, the thing that has given me great peace, recently we lost a family dog, which is a big deal for us. I know probably for many of you also. It is a deep, deep grief and loss. And I remember talking to my daughter, whose dog it was, and saying, the one thing that offers me a sense of peace is that I never took for granted the joy that Gracie gave to us, to you, to me. I celebrated her every day. It's one of the reasons why I think about my mortality, the impermanence of my life often, which some people think might be morbid or some kind of neurotic fixation. But for me, it is the realization that people talk about when something tragic happens, that it could happen to any of us. So I think about my mortality. I think about my death. I imagine approaching it. I imagine what it would feel like for the people around me. And in so doing, I embrace the life, the moment that I have now. And for me, that leads to a lack of regret for an unlived life, so to speak, because that's what mindfulness is. It's a lived life. And mindlessness is an unlived life in the way that I'm talking. Like I said, perhaps it's not best to tell somebody to feel grateful, but rather show them our gratitude. Gratitude comes when we work for it, or does it? When we have less or more, or does it? I find that gratitude often happens when we're set in situations where we can take nothing for granted. One of the reasons why the wilderness therapy program that I worked in was so effective, one of the many reasons, is because you could take nothing for granted. You were at the mercy of the weather, of the sun and the rain, much more so than we are inside of our climate-controlled houses or cars. And so although it was harder and more challenging, it was also a place where I saw with my own eyes an increase in gratitude. I remember I had a therapist with years of experience visiting the group many years ago. And she and her husband had worked for the State Department in China many years before. And she said to me that visiting the wilderness reminded her of visiting some of those really primitive villages in China, where the dirty faces with teeth missing were filled with big smiles. And yet they had so much less than the average American. Cultivating an attitude of gratitude has been linked to better health, sounder sleep, less anxiety and depression, higher long-term satisfaction with life, and kinder behavior towards others, including romantic partners. Emmons and McCullough talk about developing gratitude. They call it gratitude light. Again, not forcing it, not dismissing, not toxic positivity, not gaslighting, not spiritual bypass, but gratitude light. Keep a journal listing 5 things you are grateful for. Keep it brief. And do this every week. And what I would add to that is that's not in lieu of the sadness. That's in addition to the sadness and the hurt and the fear. This practice, they found, led to optimism and happiness in the people who did it. People who practiced this gratitude light had better sleep patterns, more energy, higher relationship satisfaction in their romantic relationships. They talked about the idea of not confusing gratitude with indebtedness. It's not a shame-based, guilt-based. It's not that thing that our parents would say to us when we were feeling resentful or angry or upset. And they said things like, other people have it worse. That never made sense to me. Every people have it worse. That doesn't make any sense. That's irrelevant. It's the equivalent of you coming to me telling me you're happy and me saying, well, don't be so happy. Other people have it better than you. That's insane. And yet it is a common phrase in our culture between parents and children, between spouses. Try gratitude light with your family. Try saying thank you more often. Even when somebody gives you an apology, instead of saying it's okay, say thank you. Really make that apology a mindful exercise. It can be small. Gratitude, they said, Emmons and McCullough said, is more than just feeling good. It helps people become less aggressive by enhancing their empathy. Some people feel gratitude by contemplating a higher power. I personally love to think about the universe, the metaphysical universe as we understand it. To me, that gives me a sense of connectedness to the transcendent, to the divine. I do that almost every evening, thinking about the universe. And it helps me to feel and act more grateful. Like I said, the phrase "it could be worse" is nonsense. It's insane. It's really evidence of a lack of capacity on the person saying it to hold space. Serving the less fortunate for some people can be a catalyst because you come into contact with your empathic muscles and you immediately have appreciation. My daughter has said not too long ago that she was over at her boyfriend at the time's house for a holiday. And she came back with gratitude for our family. Some of the do's and don'ts that I suggest is don't go too fast. Don't go to gratitude too fast, straight away. Go slowly. Sort through it. Going fast to gratitude often leads to the exclusion of important things that you're feeling that aren't positive or aren't desired. Don't tell others what to do. Let them feel. Stay away from suggesting that somebody practice gratitude, unless, of course, they're asking you for tools or skills in this area. But when somebody's struggling, it's another way of dismissing, discounting. Try to avoid rescuing others from their pain and sit in the pain with them. Really, what's happening is you're rescuing yourself from the pain, not them. But because your serenity, your peace of mind has been outsourced to the other person, to the child or to the spouse or to everybody around you, you try to get them to feel something that they're not feeling so that you're okay. Don't punish yourself. Self-compassion. I had a lot that I was going to say about self-compassion today, and I felt like it was beyond the scope. But self-compassion is everything. Self-compassion is everything. If you have crazy thoughts, if you have addictions, if you have an anger problem, whatever it is, can you find a compassionate perspective? And in my experience, that's really the only thing that heals us in the long term. Hate doesn't drive out hate. Only love can do that. And that means in the world and in ourselves. And so much of us have learned to hate, to be ashamed of aspects of ourselves instead of understanding. We have adopted, internalized the way that our parents and people around us responded when we were little and they were big. And that has become our instinct. So much of psychotherapy in my work is an attempt to reverse that reaction. In essence, to reverse suffering that comes from self-judgment. Be aware of what you give to others. Are you giving it with the expectation that they like you, that they're grateful, that they think you're a good person, that the world recognizes it? I'm not saying that that's a negative thing, but be aware of that. That's something I think about every day when I think about serving people, even clients. If somebody asks me for a session outside of the normal hours, and I consider giving that, granting that, I make sure if I'm okay with it. I ask questions. What do I expect? Can I give this even if I give it to them and they don't care at all? They don't say thank you. In other words, is it an expression of my love and care, or is it an attempt to be good and appreciated? Like I said, be kind to yourself if you are struggling with gratitude, which will lead to gratitude. Listen to yourself. Listen to your symptoms. They have wisdom to offer you. They are telling you. It is the voice of your inner child. It's the voice of the divine inside of you, yelling, screaming, begging for the need to be met. And again, practicing compassion. I want to say something about negative bias. There may be a biological barrier to gratitude, which makes it unnatural for us genetically. And this is our negativity bias. Negativity bias served us historically as a species in survival because our brains were wired to recognize threats more than non-threats. This emphasis of the brain to focus on the negative ensured that we survived to pass on our genes. A simple example would be if there was a tasty piece of fruit in front of me and I failed to notice it, the outcome would only be missing a meal. So missing the positive doesn't come with a great cost. On the contrary, if I missed noticing the presence of a predator, the outcome would be death. And so my mind became, to survive, hyper-focused on the negative. We wonder why, for many of us, we are prone to focus on and remember the negative, and the negativity bias can explain this propensity. It can also explain why we struggle to practice gratitude and the need to train ourselves to be mindful of the things in our lives. And trauma exacerbates the negative bias. Trauma is a hypervigilance to focus on the threats so that they can't hurt us. Grace is an important principle, and I don't mean it in the religious sense. I mean it in the psychological sense. Our experience of grace, an experience where we receive something without our believing we have earned it, may be the most powerful way to engender gratitude. People find this grace sometimes in religion, a belief in God, or a loving friend, or in AA. I have found in my marriage with an amazing wife and in therapy where my therapist has tolerated my horrible, rotten selves for the last, I will say now, 25 years. The term horrible, rotten self itself is a term she used to use with me playfully to point out that it is our fear, my fear, that the person I am is not good enough or worthy of love. She, of course, is implying the opposite, that who I am is enough. Who I am with all of my faults, flaws, neuroses, and humanness is enough. The result of experiencing such grace, sitting with her year after year, week after week, of experiencing her non-judgment has led to a powerful sense of gratitude in me. And over the past several years, the gratitude has become easier for me. But I never tried to be grateful. Never set it as my goal. I still don't today. Ever. I try to be mindful. My road to this came through pain, through hurt, and through the powerful love that the loved ones and friends have shown me. I want to say something about Thanksgiving before we wrap up. I'll actually just read these quotes from a blog, this summary from a blog, this conclusion from a blog that I wrote about Thanksgiving. It was called Why You Shouldn't Go Home for the Holidays. And I concluded with this. We go home for the holidays if it welcomes us, all of us, ideally. Or we go home if we want to see our family and our old contexts with new eyes. We go home to come in contact with a younger version of ourselves because the holidays are regressive. We regress back to earlier years, earlier times. We go home to celebrate or remember. Or we go home because we think it is the right thing to do and guilt prevents us from staying away. We feel obligated. I hope that if you go home, that you find that all of you is welcome. And if you need therapeutic permission not to go home and instead spend your holiday with others who love you and value you, consider this right now your doctor's note. And in the end, as a therapist, I invite you to explore all the parts of yourself, all of your feelings. And perhaps by exploring all of this, some gratitude might come through on a day in which we were told that what we should feel. Maybe instead of going around the table and asking people what are they grateful for, maybe you just do a check-in. To take home, my experience is that mindfulness is greater than forced gratitude. But ultimately, it leads to gratitude. That the goal is learning how to feel all of our feelings. And for so many of the questions that beset us, for so many of the suffering, so much of the suffering that we experience, self-compassion is a big part of the answer. Self-compassion allows us to see ourselves and the parts of ourselves that are keeping us stuck in old patterns. So the first task is to be yourself first. And remember, keep going, but you don't have to do it alone. And if you can't afford therapy, find a 12-step meeting. They are free. And with the people in your life, practice mindfulness and gratitude if you would like, but you don't have to promote it. People will just be attracted to it. Journaling and focusing on what is present, what is, can help. Do you want to whitewash your pain, your sadness? Do you want to avoid wallowing? You get to figure that out. It's part of the journey. And yes, acts can lead to gratitude. Oh, but for the most part, my experience tells me that embracing all of us and what is the royal road to greater gratitude in our lives. All right, folks. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. Like I mentioned earlier, if you are interested in a Finding You program, which I can't say enough about it, we have our January sessions open. Please contact us as soon as possible. They are filling up. It's going to be full soon. You can go to our website, findingyouprograms.com, to learn more. The Conscious Parenting Workshop will be January 10th, and my attachment-based therapy class, the master class, is March 7th. My next broadcast, this is the week where I do a second broadcast, so I'm going to be doing a question and answer. If you have questions you want to send in advance, please do. Email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. If you want to make suggestions, if you want to ask for copies of the slides, instead of taking notes or taking pictures, please do that. All right, folks, I hope this is a helpful point of contact in your life. And as always, for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up to these. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.